Welcome to another exciting episode of Backwards on Purpose. I'm your host, the guy they call the old guy, and the purpose of this show is to shine a light on one of our favorite federal agencies that kept us housed and warm and fed and comfy and healthcare concerns taken care of, which is really a bunch of crap. So let's talk first today. We got a lot of issues to get through, but let's talk about the agency itself. You know, I think one of the most interesting things I read the other day is that of the 432 federal agencies, our favorite agency ranks right up there at number 432. Yeah, you know, and that's a shame. A little over a year ago, they hired a new director, a lady by the name of Colette Peters, comes from Oregon. Where I believe she was the head of state prisons there. She's a reformer, and I'm sure comes to D.C. with all kinds of great ideas. And you know what? All that entrenched bureaucracy that was there before she got there, who were instrumental in making sure that this agency totally underperforms, is still there. And she's not going to accomplish anything while all those people are there because they know how to rig the system. You know, it's like sometime back they had the American Correctional Association was doing an audit of federal prisons, and you know I can remember they never talked to a single prisoner, never saw them, never got a whiff of that they wanted to talk to people. They sent out a thing that they, wanted comments from people, and nobody ever saw hide nor hair of them. You know, and that's kind of, how do you do that? You know, how can you make an accreditation of federal facilities unless you actually talk to a broad spectrum of people? You know, it's if they even focused on the health care of those of us who were there, they would have gotten an earful. You know, from guys that were losing eyes because they delayed treatment too long from cancer, guys with blood disorders, guys with other forms of cancer, guys that are diabetics. You know, the lack of care and concern on the part of these people is just amazing. You know, we'll kind of get to it, you know, or, gee, we had to cancel your appointment because we didn't have anybody on overtime that would take you to the doctor. You know, because there's no doctor on site, at least in my facility, and I understand that that's happening at most facilities. There's no doctor, so you're dealing with nurse practitioners and nurses and EMTs and people giving you treatment that I'm not sure are competent or capable of doing the right thing. And then if you disagree with them, you know, they're horrible to deal with. People who check records at outside facilities get thrown in the hole because they look to see what's going on and notice that appointments have been canceled multiple times, and you know who I'm talking about. At least some of you do. Appointments delayed for prostate blood tests, blood work, or they send it to another federal facility to have the test run, and it comes back one way. You get home shortly thereafter, and all of a sudden your test results are not quite what they were when you were there, and that's being kind to them. So being a reform-minded person in charge is not moving the needle. It's not doing a darn thing for anybody that's in there. And you know, you wonder why agencies like this, who are not lawmaking agencies, they are administrative agencies. They are there to do what the legislature has told them they need to do or pass the laws. and yet they interpret them a little bit differently than most people would, because if, for instance, which is gone now, if you were a CARES Act person, and you were there to be released because you have chronic conditions and you are extremely vulnerable to COVID that was floating around, which was one of the most successful programs in the history of the agency, and it would have let people out early, which I'm one of them, but not early enough. You know, they make excuses not to release you because you're part of their funding mechanism. I am certain of that. It's like guys getting first step credits. You know, I in all the reading I'm doing, there are some judges who are saying that first step credits should start accumulating from the day from the day you're sentenced, and others are saying, well, you're supposed to get first step credits from the day you walk in the door. And they interpret that as being, well, you're not eligible for a year. So unless you stay for 12 months or you're on home confinement or you're in a halfway house, you better make sure that you're getting them after a year. Well, what happens to the guys that were, at that point in time, were 25% of their sentence and 18 months to the door from the original sentencing requirement? And all of a sudden, you have a release date. You have everything set up. You got all the paperwork in your hand. And oh, well, you hear from the regional people that, well, there's no staff or resources that can handle you. You're going on home confinement. You know, in my release, they cited a memorandum from the Attorney General, who at that time was Barr, from 2020, and urging the release of vulnerable prisoners so that they wouldn't become vulnerable, so that they wouldn't contract some vicious stuff going around. I was there less than 2 weeks. I was isolated. Because I didn't have my COVID card. I'd had a COVID shot, but I didn't have my COVID card. And the only contact I had was with COs. And lo and behold, I got COVID. And realistically, I should have been hospitalized. I was having a very difficult time with it. And no, we're not going to do that. So some EMT came and looked at me and put his gown on and his face shield on and did a test and yep, you got it. So I got antibiotics, I got a steroid, and I got an inhaler. You know? And then I got a second round of steroids, antibiotics, and inhaler because it didn't go away. So I spent 30 days in isolation before I got moved over to the camp. You know, and then I couldn't get out of there as I was supposed to because the halfway house that was supposed to monitor my home confinement didn't have the staff or the resources. You know, and that brings up other issues of federal statute. That brings up issues of a little thing called guidelines for home confinement, which gives them all kinds of options that they can do to keep you on, to put you on home confinement, even if there's no monitoring bracelets available. You know, it's a disaster, and it's almost like the right hand hasn't got a clue what the left hand is doing, or if they do have a clue, it's really a shame that they just do what's in their own self-interest and to keep their population up, and then dump you on the street and go, okay, well, be a good boy and go from there. I was fortunate enough that my counselor at the halfway house that monitored my home confinement was a pretty decent guy. So it went from there. But the Bureau has a mandate. The director, Ms. Peters, has a mandate to assure that enough space or enough resources are available for all eligible prisoners, whether you're a First Step release, a Second Chance Act, if you're being released to home confinement, so that you're not unduly hung up in the federal system waiting to get out of there. And it's, and they do it without, we don't have any staff and resources. And then friends and family and legal representatives try and get a hold of this person, and they don't answer the phone. They don't answer their emails. They make no attempt to respond at all. And here they are violating their own guidelines. They're violating the law, and they don't care. So what do their attitude is, so sue me. And unfortunately, enough guys don't do that. They think by the time they go through an administrative remedy, which is absolute horseshit, because you're asking the same agency to overturn a ruling that someone of their agency made, you think about that. Whether you're in the BOP or if you're Social Security, that they have an administrative remedy process, and you're asking the people who made the decision to deny you to make a decision to overturn that decision. Sounds like a bunch of double talk, but in essence, that's the case. Just a waste of time. 6, 8, 10 months to go through the 4 levels of administrative procedure to get turned down every time. Or guys that are trying to get a compassionate release, when they have wardens that go, I've never issued a compassionate release since I've been here, and I have no intention of doing it going forward. Well, there are a lot of guys that are ill, that have circumstances and situations that totally deserve. They're low-risk people that should, in fact, be sent home rather than get the low-level health care or the non-existent mental health care that should not be there. They're not going to hurt people. Or the 20% of the guys that are there, or at least 20% of the guys that are there, because they got railroaded in the first place. So it's a horrible situation for everyone involved. And the worst part of that are the people at home that are thinking, well, you're going to be here on such and such a date. You can get back to doing things, or you can, go back to getting a job, or you can get your Social Security benefits restarted. They're expecting it, and some twit says, well, we don't have the staff or the resources to accommodate you. What do they think I'm going to do? What do they think most of us are going to do? Run around, wild in the streets? Doing this, I would assume that there are some people that, that might be a concern for, but a lot of guys that were released on First Step credits, on CARES Act, on Second Step Act, they're not going to hurt anybody. They're not the people who are going to, go back and start selling drugs again, or looking at kiddie porn or whatever it is they do. These are guys that have good families, have solid backgrounds, and are going to transition back into society without too much of a problem. But because the Bureau thinks of itself as the be-all, end-all of the situation, that's, they just make it up as they go along. They don't care about the statute. They don't care about their own guidelines. They don't care about the Attorney General's recommendations. They're just going to do what they need to do, and, they get away with it. And it's incumbent on guys to call them out on that. To call them out on First Step credits. 5 days a month doesn't sound like much, but it starts to make a difference after a while, especially guys that have been there for a long time. and it's a terrible situation, and I think it's all about money and power, and they don't expect that anybody's going to do anything about it. That brings me back to something I talked about early on in my radio broadcast some weeks ago, is that there's nowhere for guys to go to figure out how to do certain things. It's a great law library in most facilities, and there is some help from the population that's there. But I did find out that if you want the right answer, you look it up yourself. But then, in order to do these administrative remedies, in order to word them correctly, in order to set yourself up as you're going through this process so at a certain time you can do something about it, there's no guidelines, there's no help on how you do that. And hiring an attorney while you're in custody, especially in some of the locations these places are in, most of the help is non-existent. So I've urged attorneys, law schools, law students, what have you, to write a guideline for federal prisoners, or state prisoners for that matter, which is different, but for federal prisoners, on how you do these kind of things. How do you word it? If you want a compassionate release, how are you supposed to word it so that when they turn you down, as they want to do, that you can take it to the next level and do something with it? Or, filing motions in federal court for to get the court to consider what you're doing. There's nothing that tells you what to do. And, you can get books from Amazon. You can't have somebody send you a used book because there might be something there. But to be able to order a how-to from Amazon or some other Books A Million or some other source mailed directly to you on how you do it. I wanted to know how to do a podcast. So my sister ordered a couple of paperbacks for me, and it was incredibly helpful on how you put, not only this broadcast, but as we're putting my podcast together, how you do that. And there's, step by step, do this, do that, do the other thing, and that's what needs to be done, needs to be made available to prisoners so that they can file the administrative remedies, they can file a compassionate release, they can file 2241s or 2255s. You can get the forms, but it's not the form, it's the wording. How do you word this kind of stuff so that it can, in fact, make a difference? So I'm urging someone at one of the gazillion law schools around the country, or innocence projects, or something in multi-states that can help prisoners properly draft those documents. And I also urge guys that are disputing a conviction, not because they didn't do it, but if they need help, if they do seriously dispute what happened to them, most states have innocence projects. I know that Ohio has one. I'm sure that many other states have them too. They're generally at law schools, at state institutions. I know the University of Michigan has one, and a number of other law schools around the country have them. Check in with the Innocence Project in your state and see what goes on, see what you might be able to do. It doesn't cost you anything to check it, to see, and most of them have a questionnaire that you fill out and you send it in, and they review those applications to see who might be eligible to have their conviction looked at. And it's worth the little bit of time it takes to look up the Ohio Innocence Project or Kentucky Innocence Project or West Virginia Innocence Project. That that a lot of guys, I believe, were railroaded. And, those people are there to help you take advantage of that. Take a look at it. They can tell you. They have kids that are in law school and led by professors, law experts who can delve into things. And they can tell you whether, you got hosed or, maybe there's something there that we can take a peek at. So it doesn't hurt to do that. And you can do that quickly on an internet search. Kentucky Innocence Project or, Pennsylvania Innocence Project. Some states have more than one. So look into it. But again, the one of the biggest needs is for someone to write a how-to manual to word these forms. Just kind of a generic, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, to do it and do it effectively. And to get it through the administrative process or whatever in the least amount of time. I remember my attorney sent a document to my warden requesting compassionate release. And he turned me down because I hadn't spent enough time. I didn't meet the 25% rule. Well, I didn't know that compassionate release had a minimum time limit on it. I had no idea that was going on. Well, I subsequently found out there is none. Compassionate release is not dependent on how much time you spent there. Compassionate release has everything to do with the circumstances why you're asking for it. So it's, I'm another statistic of, the guy turned me down, but not for the right reason. So how do you overcome that? And I think everything is in how you draft those particular documents or motions that are in court. There's nobody there to help you do. Even if you want to file a civil rights violation or you want to file a pro se motion, it's how do you, I'm not an attorney. 99% of the guys aren't attorneys. How do you do that? So I think it's very important that somewhere along the line somebody stand up, publish that how-to guide, and allow prisoners to buy those so that they can draft their own successful or at least competent, capable documentation. And the other thing I harp on ever since I first sat down and got behind this microphone is the crushing need for mental health services. You go into these facilities, I'm going to tell you, first off, you're scared to death. Secondly, your anxiety level on a 1 to 10 is probably running about 100. You're feeling guilty about family left home, how they're going to fend for themselves. It's so many emotions. You're angry. Your anxiety. It's a horrible situation. And literally, if you're a drug addict, you can probably get all the help you need, or at least some help. But if you're a guy coming in there and need those resources, man, they're non-existent. 2 guys for 1,300 people. Now, how many hours a week do you think you can get on his schedule so that you can talk and kind of work through those issues? Well, I'm going to tell you that you can't. And instead of budgeting for those particular items, to increase staff, to increase mental health services at federal facilities, that it just kind of falls flat in his face, so that when you're ultimately released, you're still going out, you're still anxious, you still got PTSD, you've still got all these emotions running through. You've been guilty, feeling guilty all those many months for leaving your family, and it's a horrible situation. And nothing's done. Go out, be a good boy, and don't get in trouble again. That's a horrific thing. Or it just, there's got to be some resources to do that. If you're in the business of warehousing people and you want them, send them back out somewhat rehabilitated, you've got to provide some basic level of mental health services, and that's more than just sitting down, taking a 10-page questionnaire, filling out a 10-page questionnaire so that they can figure out whether you're playing with all your marbles or not. It's sitting down with someone to go through how you're feeling. That medical issue and getting help filling out forms, it's a nightmare. It's nonsense. These people can't even figure out how to use the intent of Congress on the First Step Act. So many guys are spending so much more time, excuse me, in these facilities, wasting away when they should have been released months ago. Or they can't get released because there's no staff or resources, despite having guidelines, despite having statutes on the books. That's just, in a word, that's a bunch of crap. And shedding some light on these issues, and we all thought about it. Excuse me. We all thought about it. We all went through it. We still think about it. We still go through it. And how do you combat that? Well, you combat that by shedding a light on things, by bringing out into the public the kind of stuff that goes on. Number 432 out of 432. It's a stellar record, and I hope one of these days that the director listens to my show and maybe gets horrified about what goes on, because nothing's changing. She goes to look at a facility with all her entourage, that the facility's known for weeks that she's coming, so they clean everything up and they get classes together and they get people in there. They look like a model facility when they're nothing more than a piece of crap. And it's just a shame that kind of stuff goes on. And it's not, as I say, it's not going to change until more people stand up and take notice. And that includes not only us who are there, but our families and friends and anybody else who might care about what happens. It's to get it, to make questions, to make comments about this, and bring a spotlight onto this federal agency that is absolutely horrific in the administration of its mission. Well, that's about it for me for today. I thank everybody that's listening. I hope I got a couple of guys out there that are listening to me. If you have a comment or a question or something you want me to cover, you can send me an email at backwards@myyahoo.com. That's backwards@myyahoo.com. I'd also like to thank the folks at WBGU 88.1 FM for giving me the opportunity to sit here and talk for a half an hour or so about the ills of our favorite agency. But, somebody's got to do it, and somebody's got to affect change, because you're affecting people's lives, and you're affecting a lot of people's lives. And simply sitting there ignoring it, hoping that it'll go away or improve or nobody will pay any attention is just nonsense. So once again, this is the old guy. The name of the show is Backwards on Purpose. I'll be back in 2 weeks, and I hope that you'll listen back again. Thank you so much.
1, 2, 3, 4.